Hey, we're back. I'm not sure what I did. I just hadn't had it opened all the way, and I certainly had it only open the sculpture. I had to follow it through. And this is the master copy. Master copy. So I need to find out where that one actually is. I guess it's right off the desktop, and I hadn't been using it. Anyway, if I run this one, give me a second here. We should be able to get it up and running. I'm pretty sure this is the one. Well, it won't matter. Just let me hit F5, and we'll use the Flask Launch and Debug. Should be good. I grab our URL, and actually I think this one should be running now, so I can disconnect it and connect it. And I'll probably have to just, I'm going to clear the cache, because I need to do that for debugging. And path, we're going to hit OK. And then we're going to reconnect this and see if it doesn't run our script. And it did. Perfect. It's up and running. So now we can continue. So let's take a look at the introduction and what would I do now. Give me 1 second. Okay. And I'll close out this. I think testing sound looks good. There may be a visual on here. Oh, there I am, up in that top little corner. Sorry, it is a Friday night and I am out of it. So, what I would probably do is just start with making an ASCII text, and I'm going to bring it in here in comments and put in Python basics and let GitHub Copilot take over, which should be running down here, but I can tell right now I don't even have my GitHub running. I don't know why this script's giving me so much trouble today. Let's see if we can't get our GitHub Copilot going. Let's type it in the extensions. GitHub Copilot. GitHub Copilot. Looks like my subscription should be good. Settings. Disable, uninstall. Strange. I've lost everything else. Let me just see if I've got a call. Okay, it's running. Okay, so let's talk about what we could do. And what I'm going to do is just start typing in Python. And I love the way it just tries to figure out what I want to do. I want to do Python basics. I would like to use it as an interactive shell. Interactive, and I can tab through, and this is how you undo things if you're not. You still have to know how to code. I'm going to type in, these are things that were coming out of the text that I was interested in. I'm jumping over to the other script, but I was typing in REPL, REPL, which is read eval print loop. These are just things that can help me as I'm reading through a text and kind of translating it into Visual Studio Code. We're going to look at variables, obviously. We're going to look at different data types, obviously. And then we're going to look at strings. And if we just hit comma, it'll probably give us the integer, floats, booleans. We'll probably continue that with lists, tuples, dictionaries. And I think that's probably enough. So I'm just going to tab through there and hit enter. And I'm going to skip the operators and we'll get there in time. Now what you could do is once you prep it like that, you can just kind of prime it with an @hops component. And I find these ones probably so trivial, but to get your head around it, @hops component, I actually want to prime an integer, as I should call it, and basically it will just set up a script to write an integer value, and the definition will be simple enough and you'll return that value. So there's no real point in checking that. Over here you definitely could. You would just have to close this out with Control C. You would have to Control S, save, and hit F5 and run it, and grab that URL and then load it into yet another Python hops component, and you can basically put it in an integer and pull it right back out, which is absolutely ridiculous because you would just normally type in an integer and use that as a number slider as an input right here in Grashopper. So that's pretty trivial, but it's also getting your head around what needs to happen. If we prime another script afterwards, it's already ready to go, it probably would figure out that we want to do a float. And so float's the same thing. What you can keep an eye on is that the input is hops integer and hops integer output. You should be watching that as you go, because if we go through here and do the float and we get to the input and I do this, I can select it but then back off, take everything back, and come all the way back to the beginning of this hops. And what's great is then you list all the things they've been bringing in here, all of the things that you can actually work with. We're not going to be doing anything too fancy right now, but right now we just want to do a hops float, and it doesn't exist. There isn't a hops float, so that will bug out. The hops integer goes to hops integer because that's actually a data type, but hops float doesn't exist. So you've got to get in here and use hops number instead, and then you'll see the default hops number, and the value is there. It'll be a float, and the output will be a hops float. And those are the little things you have to catch. You write your definition, and once again, I'm going to exit here. Mostly I just type clear to keep this nice and clean while I'm going. And then I take my definition, I continue it, and I return my float. Once again, there's no point in running that and producing a node for that. It would be almost as useless as, well, not actually more useless than just doing the hello Michael or hello world. So we continue with the tab string. That's going to give us something a little interesting because we're going to move out of that data type and get into something we might want to do something with, but you can guess yourself what is it going to choose. As it goes through here and makes a nickname, you can add an icon in this time, which is kind of interesting. Actually add icon equals, and you can go in and put a particular icon that you want. I don't use icons because I prefer to go up here and just type in the word and then roll from a hops node through to a text node, and there it is. And I don't need bifocals when I do that. And I'm not one to really get into icons. If anybody knows me, I've gone nuts on just using like the symbol for Wickerson Studios Python scripts, and I've got another one and I just use the C script. So I'm pretty lazy when it comes to making icons, even though I've got a nice way of making them with the aviary tool, making my own nodes create their own icons. So I can go into detail when I want to do stuff like that, but nothing right now. Yeah, it's late for me. I get up very early. So you can see the hop string is going and it works. Now it's not going to tell you if it doesn't work. So as we push through and then you just return a string, that one's going to return as a value as well. So what's going to happen after that? It probably would be best to start thinking, what can I do with strings? So here is where it doesn't know what I want to do. It wants to put in a Boolean, and a Boolean's a great thing to put in. And actually, I think I will, because I'm going to put a Boolean on almost every component so I can have this trigger to turn it on and off. If you don't have a trigger to reset it, your nodes over here, when we get into things like this, they get pretty sloppy when you don't have a trigger to do a true or false to activate it to have an output. So I actually put a Boolean on almost every single one of the nodes, but I can't say for sure if that's what I'm going to do on these first ones. So we're going to go through and you see the hops Boolean comes up, the hops output comes up, and it's going to write a Boolean. It's going to return that value. Those are about the most basic functions I think I could ever imagine. At this point, I want to do something with strings, and I'm reading through a textbook, say, I'm following online. It's very fast with GitHub Copilot to translate any Python text that you come across, and I'm pretty sure this is going to be very helpful for getting into Unity and using C#, which is something I'm going to work on as well. So I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to type in concatenate and concatenate, and then I'm going to make a node, prime it, and actually it's already ready to go. Concatenate, concatenate, nickname concatenate, concatenate two strings, input, it will take one string, it will take two strings, it will end it, it will output a string, it will take those two parameters into the function as string 1 and string 2, it will concatenate them and return it. And this is one we may end up testing. And you can see already I've got it's wanting to do, and I'm pretty confident that's going to run just fine. So we're going to go in here, we're going to hit Control S save, we're going to hit F5 to run, we're going to go down and grab our URL, we're going to double click on our hops node, we're going to put it in \, and you should write the things that you actually want to bring up here, but since we're using concatenate, it's going to grab all of them. I'm going to put that in and hit OK, and I've got a nice concatenated node, and while I'm at it, since it's in my clipboard, let's put it in here and get a concatenate on there. Let's take Michael, and let's just take Michael. And you don't have to do that, but you'll see what the output is and what the problem is. You can sit here and play the Grashopper game of going in here, doing this twice, in the second one going in and putting a space you can't see here. And then when you do it, you get that space and space. But that's sloppy. Let's try and fix this with Michael, and do it back in here. And what would we do? We'd have to do a little, you could use an F string, but I'm just going to actually go in and plus and add a comment with a space and another one, so the script itself cleans it up. But in doing so, I've got to leave the script, I've got to delete this. Many times you have to go and change the name of this. This is for debugging that I found very essential, and I want to give this over to people trying to do it, is I'll change that to concatenate to. I'll change that function to concatenate to, and then when I save it and I hit it, it also tells me how much trouble I had with a script. So we're going to copy that one. We're going to go back into params. We're going to grab ourselves a hops node. We are going to double click on it. We're going to put in the URL, the / concatenate to is the new name, and what this does is prevent problems from everything caching in preferences. If I go over to solver and I don't want to have two items in memory, and it also, when you're doing a few things here, you're going to find uncaching the memory on the nodes usually solves you a few problems. So let's put one in there, one in there, one in there, and there you go, you get your space. And while we're at it, let's put that concatenate in there too, and that's the key word. Now you probably should, up above, say if you're learning basic Python, what would have to be typed. So I'm just going to grab a scribble node, and I don't have my thing fully extended. I'm going to grab a scribble node, and I'm also going to remind myself of what has to be typed in for that node to work. And you can put that anywhere. You can put it over here, you can put it at the top of your script, you can let people know up here that these are the keywords. This one would be concatenate to, this one would be hello. You just have to remember to put that / in there, or that / before that word. So that's it. Depends how you want to do it. What do? We keep going, and maybe we stay with strings, and actually not stay with strings. Let's talk about casting, and let's cast a integer into a string. So we're just going to prime it with, sorry, I'm not sure where I am. We'll put a comment in called cast, and we'll see what we get as casting node. Okay, cast is a good name for it. Name is a good name for it. Nickname is good. Casting a string to a number. It will ask for a string. It will output an integer. Actually, it asks for two strings, which is interesting. I don't need two strings, and I don't want to output a string. I want to slow down on this, and GitHub doesn't know what I want to do. Can you believe it? Probably because not too many people have made these hops nodes like this. I'm going to go on to outputs and do a hops number, but because I want to actually have it to an integer, I'm going to output a hops integer, and that name is going to be hops integer, and I could do it to a float as well, but I'm not going to. I'm going to get into my hops integer. Let me check that I have this right. It looks pretty sloppy. This one goes in here. Outputs is working. what happened? Ah, output needs to equal. I've got a problem here with my, yeah, I've got a problem with my, there we go. That should work better. And I think if I continue it, it's going to give me a hops number. I don't really want the hops number. What I want is to end my square bracket. And I think that'll close off the outputs. What happens is usually, to get my eyes on this right, the hops string comes in. You put the comma. You don't need the comma on the last hops string. I like to end the hops input with this, and then put the hops, and then put the input in. And it's just nicer to see it in order like this, because then this little one gets pushed down here as well. It's just the way I like to read the script a little better and keep it organized. And I think that'll run fine. I'm checking my commas. And then I've got an extra hops input here that I didn't need. We're going to skip that. We're going to go down. We're going to get our definition. And we're going to return. Now we don't want that to return a float. We want that to return an integer. And of course it could be cast internally, but I think we can just cast an int to the string. And string, I think we're good. Let's take a look if we can bring in a string and turn it into a number. And this is almost completely useless for Grasshopper, because if you have a word like a string as 1, as 2, that's going to still interpret as 2 for data coming out anyhow. So it's kind of purposeless, but as you read through books and learn about Python, since we're supposed to be learning about Python in this one, you might want to write a few scripts like this. Here's another one that you might want to do to test, and I'm just going to call this one, because this is what I have in my scripts, test a number for equivalence. Okay, test a number for equivalence. We'll do a component. We'll call it equivalence. As long as I spell it wrong, right. I'm sure I'll have trouble with this one. It's going to try and get through that. Test if two numbers are equivalent. The inputs are going to be, let's test for the first input. Let's test for something different. So I'm thinking about the script I write before. I'm actually looking at it and cheating off my own notes. Hop string, string to cast. That would be cool. But before we get through that, let's add a comma. Oops. Let's get rid of all this. And we will comma, go down, and we will do a hops integer. So let me go back in here and get an integer. Integer. Let's see what pops up. And then once again, see, from what I've done in my scripts, GitHub tries to do more, and you gotta lay some control over what you're doing. And then a hops number, that should be enough to get us the outputs. And then we're going to output two outputs. Actually, we're going to test a string. We're going to test a string to an integer for equivalence, and then we're going to test a number to a number to an integer to a float. I think that's what we'll end up doing. So let's also have two outputs. And what's nice in here is we're not going to get too complicated in this first one, but you can actually start working from single items into working into lists and actually trees. So this is pretty cool stuff when you get into it. I don't want a string here. I want I want two hops booleans. So I'm going to go down here. I'm going to type in. I'm going to go down. Oops. You got to watch where your stuff's jumping around to. I'm going to go down here. Actually, I think I'm just going to jump in here and prime hops boolean and see if I can't get boolean 2. And I actually have a third boolean, but I want this one to be boolean 1, and this one to be boolean 1, and this one I want to be boolean 2, and this one I want to be Boolean 2, and then I don't want anything else in here. I'm okay with that. And now let's just give ourselves a little bit of room here. Let's go down and see if it gives us a function. It's going to bring in a string, an integer, and a number float. That looks good. And it should test for an integer. Let's return a string. Let's just do this differently, just so I can keep with what I had. Let's test if a string is equivalent to the integer, and let's test if the integer is equivalent to the number. We could do the last one, but we don't have a third output coming out of our node. I think I have a moth flying around in here, so I'm just going to go down here and I'm going to get rid of that. This would be a cool one. So let's go down here and exit, and go back up here, and grab ourselves a node. And we need some numbers and we need some strings, so we're going to actually, what should we test for? I'm not even sure. I had an idea what it was. Let me go down here and see what I did. This is really what I'm writing again. I just haven't been looking at it. Yeah, I'm just going to test the equivalence on the string, integer, and number as to whether those numbers are equivalent. This one's going to compare the string to the integer, and this one will compare the integer to the number and show if it's actually equivalent. And these are really small little projects to learn about Python. You can do the whole book yourself. You could avoid the 3DM geometries. But let's get in here and run our script. Control S and F5, get our URL. Everything's working. Let's type it in here. / and we'll test for equivalence. There we go. And there you go. And now we should be able to grab a number slider. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It seems like a good one. And that's a string. But that string, we want to know if as an integer it's the same. We want to know here. It's solved for both. We probably want to go in here and type in equivalence. So we have an equivalence node. And let's see what our Boolean evidence are. The first one is false and the second one is true. So it actually worked. So that's enough to kind of get started. I didn't bring the cast in. It's pretty boring. Let me get rid of this one so we can see. I thought I had this up and running. I guess I have to keep that up to keep this little script do-si-doing here. Or I can just, that's weird that it gets rid of it. I like that little pop out. Oh, probably I didn't make an additional pop out. So I guess we've lost out on that. Anyway, that's alright. We'll just make it full screen again. So, I had the other script kicking around here. It was either here or here. I'm not sure where I put it, but if I look farther, I probably think that's enough with that type of stuff. Just to get Python basics, what I'll probably want to do is get into what makes using Python so interesting. So let's go in here and do flow control. And this is where we're going to get into the difference between equivalence and equals operators, conditionals, and really get going with the if, elif, and else statements. So you put that one in there. We can definitely cut and paste from another script. And if you don't know how to make ASCII text, I've done it on other ones. But let's go in here and get in the flow control. And let's talk about what we want to do first. Well, we definitely want to do flow control because GitHub Copilot is smart enough to know what's going on. We could write down the difference between equivalence and conditionals, but I think that's enough. And if we do it and we prime, we don't have to get to the for and while loops. And it wouldn't hurt to know that that's where we're going and then ending up in functions. We can prime it with an at, and I'll bet you the first one comes up if. We get an if statement, name, if. I think it'll probably ask for a Boolean, conditional, probably ask for a string. Yeah, that makes sense. I don't need that, so I'm going to go back to here and come down here and end it, and then I'm going to output Um, Actually, I think I don't even need the first string. I'll just do a conditional boolean. Yeah, I don't even need that. Let me get rid of this. And we can just go to the hops conditional boolean, true or false, and then a string that comes out, and then we will have a simple if statement in a function. I can't imagine how simple this is going to be. It's going to make a conditional boolean. It's going to have if condition return true and else return false. That's a pretty simple conditional to get up and running as a if statement. Now what you have to think about is, even though you can get this running on hops through the server, keep in mind you have to leave Control C, leave. I do make a habit of clearing, so I keep things here. You have to save and hit F5, run it again, and now you will be able to run a extremely basic if conditional. Really nice. / over here, obviously the keyword is if, and we hit OK, and we have an if statement. So if this boolean toggle is set to false, we will have the output if to false. If it's set to true, it'll be to true. Now that's a pretty simple script needing if statement, but what you want to do is you want to think about these things, because you are going to write more and more complex things in here. There's no reason that I couldn't use that conditional to start bringing in hs dot hops, whatever, breps, curves, integers, lines, mesh, numbers, params, points, strings. I mean, like, this is crazy what you can end up doing with just a small library of 3DM. And actually, I shouldn't say the 3DM, Rhino 3DM API is small. If they just haven't put everything in here, you'll see you're missing planes, you're missing intervals, you're missing a few things that I've had to play around with and make, or at least use Grashopper to extend. So it would be nice if they extended more than that. But otherwise, it's working. This little thing, I can hit File, Save. You can just keep going, and if you're brave, you'll just hit hops and just keep going, and you'll trust what you get. But I'll tell you, if you do this, you're going to run into problems in that for loop. It's going to start putting things in that don't exist because it's not familiar with it. But for iteration on a string, it's okay. I think that one will run all right, but that's not actually what I want to do. And to use GitHub that quickly is really kind of foolish. You're not thinking through it. You've got to slow down and do it right. So I'm going to go in here, exit again, clear it. I'm going to save this file as we go farther. Control S. I'm going to wait on it, and we will slowly build a monster script. But that's how it goes. It's not that tough. If you break it down to these small little exercises, you will just kill it when you start writing your scripts over in Python before even bringing them in the Grasshopper, and also bringing them in multiple times, sharing them, running multiple scripts at once. Really fast processing, and hopefully you really enjoy it. I've got so much to show, so much to do on top, and I think it's late tonight and I'm done. So thanks very much for watching.